I'm Mark Dolan, and this is GBN America. Now, let's get the latest on overnight developments in Florida as residents are being warned not to visit areas hit by Hurricane Milton after it brought tornadoes, floods, and storm surges to the state. More than 3 million homes and businesses are without power, while Governor Ron DeSantis says more flooding is expected in coming days. 4 people were killed by tornadoes on the state's east coast in St. Lucie County. And in St. Petersburg on the west coast, the water supply has been cut. A crane crashed into a newspaper building, and the roof of a Major League Baseball stadium was ripped off. Milton is now moving into the Atlantic, but many parts of the state are flooded, with some people being rescued by boat. Let's get the latest from national political reporter at RedState, Neil W. McCabe. Neil, thank you so much for joining us. First of all, can you bring us up to speed on how things are in Florida right now?
Well, of course, Florida residents know that hurricanes are a fact of life here. And so the people who stay or the people who evacuate, everybody sort of braces. They wait for the wind to die down, and then they recover. And so it's a part of the culture, but still, Milton coming so close after Helene, which was 2 weeks ago, is absolutely horrific. And so the people who are just sort of putting their lives back together again, especially on the West Coast in the Sarasota and Tampa area, it is unimaginable, the tragedy. And so, right now we're just sort of, the wind has died down a little. Milton's off to sea, as you said, but people are now sort of picking up the pieces and seeing what's left. And so we're going to get a better idea of the death count as the recovery effort begins. Of course, the first responders, they're taken offline. They ride out the storm in special hardened bunkers. And now that they're now at work now. And so we're going to find out what's going on. You mentioned what happened at Tropicana Field, the roof of that baseball stadium. That we're still going to wonder who made the decision to do that, because that ceiling or roof of that stadium is basically tarp and fiberglass. And that's where people were staging the first responders. That was supposed to be the command and control of the recovery effort. And so we're still waiting to see who actually made that decision. Very ill considered. But other than that, I would have to say that the recovery in Florida is going well so far. The National Guard, the Florida Emergency Management Team, and of course, Governor Ron DeSantis is very much on top of it. There isn't a state in the country that wouldn't want Ron DeSantis to be their governor during an emergency like this, Mark.
Was there enough warning that this was coming?
Well, you see it coming, but, people are people, right? And so everyone assumes it's going to hit someplace else. And you have two kinds of people who stay. You have sort of the old Florida salts who are basically saying, hey, we ride this thing out just like we always do. And then you have people who have a legitimate concern about looters who come in. So what will happen is they'll order an evacuation, and then sometimes bad actors come into those evacuated neighborhoods and basically go shopping in people's homes and businesses. And so unfortunately, those are the people, if they bet wrong, they're the ones who may be killed because of the storm surge that comes in. That was absolutely terrible in some of these places, especially Sarasota, Mark.
Now, Neil, you are a former public affairs NCO in the Army Reserve. You were deployed for 15 months to Iraq as a combat historian, in addition to other mobilizations. What, in your view, is it that the affected Floridians need right now?
Well, what they need right now is fresh water, and they need toiletries, and they need those very basic, primitive things. They need subsistence, and with the water being cut off, and of course, with the flooding, your sewage systems that are going to be overrun, and of course, that's going to contaminate all of the fresh water supplies. And so you have the fetal material. We have they call it turbidity, where the bacteria count gets so high that you can't drink the water. Obviously, with the water cut off, people were told to fill their bathtubs so that their toilets would work. And so basically, everyone becomes very primitive, right? We're back at year zero, and then we build up again.
Indeed. How important will the spirit of the people be in order to get through this? Not just the sort of the fortitude and perseverance for the individuals involved, but those helping out.
Well, there's an amazing spirit here. And, every state in the United States has its own culture and its own history. And as I said before, hurricanes are part of that culture and tradition here in Florida. It's just something that they go through. I grew up in Massachusetts, although I've lost my accent, Mark. We have the same feeling about snowstorms, right? Like that driveway isn't going to shovel itself. And so you just get out and you dig. And that's the attitude here. And I will say the Florida National Guard is one of the toughest National Guard. I think the Florida National Guard by itself could probably take on France, right? Those guys are tough. But when it comes to hurricanes, that's their business. This is their wheelhouse. And it's a tragedy and it's horrible. But the fact that you have guys like the Florida National Guard rolling up in their trucks and their helicopters, I mean, it really means something to people that you pay the money for the government. You wonder what they're really up to, right? But when people see that helicopter land and they start dropping off pallets of water, that's when you say, okay, now I get why I pay my taxes. And so nobody in the state of Florida wonders where their tax dollars go when they see the Florida National Guard show up.
Most definitely. Well, that's high praise coming from a man who has served in the military. We cannot assume, can we, Neil, that everyone will be insured, because insurance is extremely expensive in Florida and sometimes not available at all for people's homes and property.
Yeah, it's a big problem, Mark, because there are two things necessary for Florida to exist: air conditioning and flood insurance. And frankly, the insurance companies, it's almost foolish to do business in Florida. There was a run recently where you went 10 or 12 years without a major hurricane. And so the insurance companies were just banking those premiums and life was good. But in the last 3 or 4 years, you had Ida, you had Nicole, and now, of course, you had Helene. And then on top of Helene, Milton. It's really going to be tough, and the state is going to have to figure that out. There's going to have to be some major legislation, and Ron DeSantis has been working with people to sort of fix it. There's another guy people don't know about. That's the chief financial officer of Florida, a guy named Jimmy Patronis, who is actually in charge of insurance in the state, and he is one of the big reformers trying to fix things. And one of the things that Patronis is going to do is he's going to set up insurance villages all over this area that's been impacted. He's going to pull the insurance companies in a set area. They're going to set up their booths where people can just walk in and get their claims done. And Patronis has said, if you want to do business in the state, this is the time you prove it. And so we're going to see how that happens. But these insurance villages are going to be set up all over the affected areas so that people don't have to hunt down or wait on hold on the phone. They can just sort of walk in and get their insurance claims settled. Mark.
That's what leadership looks like. Well, speaking of leadership, you've spoken about Ron DeSantis with glowing praise, and I think rightly so, based upon what I've seen in terms of the very quick response. He clearly is an astute policymaker and an excellent executive as well. Has this become political at all, and could it influence what happens in November?
Well, Vice President Kamala Harris, she made the mistake of trying to get into a public spat with DeSantis, because DeSantis apparently didn't take her call. Well, there's a lot of people who don't take her call. And she went public with it, and she tried to make it like DeSantis was playing politics. And what he said was plain and simple. I haven't spoken to her about any of our emergencies for 3 years. And the idea that she, who has no operational role at all in the disaster relief, and would try to insert herself was absurd. And he praised Biden, as well he should. President Biden also said that he gets along well and that he's been working well with DeSantis. It was a huge mistake for Harris. And it was Mark, you have to understand, that was a planned media ambush because first the Harris campaign leaked that DeSantis didn't take the call. And then she took one question on the tarmac from one reporter who asked that question. And it's like everything was staged for Harris to basically open an attack on DeSantis. And it just absolutely blew up in her face. It was a terrible move by Harris. And really, DeSantis brushed it off. And they're also, DeSantis has also dealt with other things where people said, well, FEMA said this and FEMA said that. DeSantis has said directly, I am in charge of this state. And if anybody interferes with you, they have to go through me. And he actually included in his executive order that everyone has the right to go back to their home, regardless of what anyone else says. And he also suspended people from blocking background checks. So there was no restrictions on people buying firearms going into this tragedy. He also suspended all the tolls. I mean, the guy's fantastic, Mark. I don't want to sound like a sales brochure for DeSantis, but when you're in Florida, you got to love the guy.
Well, he earned my respect during the pandemic with his very sensible approach to lockdowns, masking, and vaccine mandates. We know that Florida is an excellent control in the COVID experiment. It's a bit like Sweden in Europe, given the fact that the Sunshine State took a very different approach to tackling the virus with very similar outcomes to states like California, but none of the economic or societal damage. Do you think that Ron DeSantis is a future presidential candidate?
Well, let me just first say that there's a current presidential candidate, Donald J. Trump, who has a home in Mar-a-Lago, and he actually let first responders stay in his home in Mar-a-Lago to ride out the storm. And of course, Trump has been very supportive of DeSantis. When it comes to 2028, it's going to be quite the field because there was no mega bench in 2016 or 2020. But now what you have is this sort of mega aristocracy. And you have a lot of people who came into their political life as in the sort of Trump era, Trump mold. A lot of people think that J.D. Vance is doing so well that it could be the 12-year ticket, 4 years of Trump training Vance, and then Vance takes over. But there's a lot of people who are going to want that slot at 28, not the least of which is DeSantis. But, there's a lot of other people who want to be president of the United States. You can believe it, Mark.
Most definitely. Well, let's hope it's a golden era for US politics in the next decade or so. Briefly, Neil, before we let you go, we're so grateful for your time speaking to us from Florida. Can I just ask you about your appraisal of President Joe Biden's response to the events of the last couple of days?
Well, there's two characters of the presidency, right? You're the head of state and you're the head of government. And so they're combined. And so it might be a little difficult for people in England to appreciate that the president is both prime minister and king. And so the great presidents pull off both at the same time. We certainly saw that with Ronald Reagan. And Biden has had a very difficult presidency. Really, it's been a tragic presidency. But in these moments, Biden and his team have sort of played that role as the head of state, the father of the nation, if you will. He has not politicized the disaster relief to the degree others would. Frankly, the degree others would want him to. And it certainly played out when he congratulated DeSantis and said that DeSantis was doing a good job.
I'm glad to hear that. Well, listen, Neil, more power to you, and all of our thoughts and wishes go to the people of Florida at this extraordinarily difficult time. My thanks to Neil W. McCabe, national political reporter at RedState. I'm Mark Dolan. This is GBN America. For more videos of this nature, head to gbnews.com/America, and I'll see you next time.